Let's get nerdy. We're gonna spend the next 5 minutes or so talking about data, how it's represented visually, and how beautiful or ugly that can be. I assume that because most of you are here at Ignite, you like digging deep into topics like that. But just in case, consider for a moment how pervasive data visualization really is in our daily lives. From topics of finance to politics to environment, this visualization is all around us. So first, a little bit of history. This visualization goes way back. 2nd century BC, Egyptians were creating the first tables and charts. They're actually cataloging astrological information to aid them in their navigation practices. Fast forward to the 17th century, René Descartes creates the Cartesian coordinate system. You guys probably remember this from school, the X and Y axis graph, essentially providing us with the first framework or tool system to visualize quantitative data. Then in 1801, William Playfair, a Scottish economist, published Statistical Breviary. This was a seminal work for the time. He visualized the trade balances between England and North America, showing what happened, the effects of the American Revolution in the 1770s. He also created the first pie chart, documenting European landholdings. The French loved it. They called it Le Camembert because it reminded them of how cheese wheels were divided at the time. This led to 7 years later, Charles Mansard creates what was known as the most beautiful statistical graph ever created. It visualizes Napoleon's failed advance and retreat into Moscow in 1812, combining data elements like troop levels and temperatures and a whole bunch more. Today, the internet brings us a whole lot of new things, obviously. With all its flaws, Facebook, the internet is still an amazing tool for sharing information. It brings us amazing graphics like this one from the Polynational War Memorial, demonstrating the effects of war over the last 100 years and beautifully juxtaposing the red poppies with the thousands of lost lives they represent. Or this interesting one, which details the import and export balances between the 5 largest world economies, really giving us an insight into how interconnected and interdependent we all are. Sometimes it can be a little bit more lighthearted, like this one by Matt Cook from the California Institute of Technology. He took an unmanned bicycle and pushed it 800 times and tracked the path it took, which I think is amazing. But what really interests me is when data is misleading. And one of the great examples of this is the Mercator projections. This is essentially a map of the Earth from the 1500s. The problem with the Mercator projection is that the world is 3D and this map is 2D. And that leads to all sorts of problems like North America and Europe appearing massively larger than they really are. Most of us grew up thinking that Greenland was the same size as Africa. It's not. It's not even close. It's about a third of the size of Australia. And so we've spent the last 500 years trying to come up with a better version. And what we've got is the Winkel-Trapel projection. Not perfect, but getting better. But how about when data is purposely misleading? This gets really interesting. Some of you may remember the 2005 Florida Stand Your Ground law. This came into national attention in 2012 when Trayvon Martin was killed. And this interesting graphic by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement shows what happens in the murder rate after the law was passed. Or does it? The original graph that I just showed you is on the left. If you'll notice, the y-axis is actually flipped with 0 at the top. So they're purposely misleading you. I inverted it, and you can actually see what happened in Florida after that law was passed. Pretty tricky. Another great example of this is climate change. This is an actual published graph of the average global temperatures over the last few years, and you can see how somebody could be skeptical of global warming when you cherry pick the data that you want to see. But if you take a step back and take a look at a larger data set going back to the late 1800s, it's pretty difficult to miss exactly what's been happening with overall temperatures on the planet over the last few years. Sometimes data can be a little bit more confusing in how you represent it or understand it. For example, trying to correlate marriage rates in Kentucky with the number of people who have drowned after boating accidents, or the lethality of Nicolas Cage films, which is personally pretty terrifying. Let's close with this. Hans Rosling once said, in order to listen to the music, you actually have to hear it. But oftentimes, we're just shown the notes. We actually have to hear it to understand it. So let's all try to listen a little bit more closely. Thank you.